Welcome back to the second part of this video series. In the first part, we talked about the 7 key fundamental differences between residential and commercial property. What we're going to focus on now is number 8 to number 12. And in fact, we actually forgot to record number 8 the first time. So I'm going to get started with number 8 now. If you haven't watched the first part to this series, make sure you click back through because it's important that you actually watch from the beginning. So step back through to the first part of the series and then watch it through to the second.
My name is Michael Timmins and I run a company called HCO, which is a real estate business that's primary focus is delivering health and wellbeing centres called Maybloom. Maybloom's purpose is to inspire people to move and live positively every day. We believe in the powerful effect that exercise, positive choices and social interaction can have in helping people to prioritise their health. I have nothing to sell you, I'm simply here to share the journey and bring you along for the ride.
Now, getting stuck into number 8, we're really talking about exposure, accessibility and ease of access. What's really important in a commercial setting versus, say, a residential setting is that a lot of businesses still want good exposure to be able to market and advertise their businesses. So more often than not, main roads, main streets, high profile corners, they are the ones that in the commercial sector really hold the most value because they can offer the greatest exposure for marketing and for brand presence and brand awareness to the tenants that are going to go into them. The other thing to think about is accessibility and being able to ensure that good solid parking is provided on site or close by if possible. We've all seen those little strips of shops where they're just on the wrong corner of the intersection. It's too hard to get to. You've got to sort of drive a kilometre up the road, do a U-turn and come back just to be able to get in there. And as we know, they are often starved for customers. They just can't attract the people to their businesses to walk in and buy. And that's a real problem when it comes to the location and the accessibility. So when you're looking for a property to purchase or when you're thinking about where you need to go into, you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the tenant. How is the tenant going to be able to attract customers to their site? And how easy is it for a tenant or for a customer to get access to the site, to get into the site, to be able to park, to be able to get the kids out of the car and put them into the pram and bring them into the store. This stuff is really important when it comes to commercial, but it's very different to residential. In most cases, the residential property that's on the nice, quiet, leafy street is going to have more value in that property than the one that's on the main road with lots of bypassing traffic, lots of road noise, and the like. So, we really want to think about that in terms of if we're going for a commercial property, you want to be really targeting properties that make sense for accessibility, make sense for ease of parking and being able to get out of the car and come into the store, make sense for exposure, but then we're looking for the complete opposite when it comes to residential. That's number 8. Let's now move into the main section of the video and go into number 9.
Number 9, we've got incentives. Now in the residential property setting, we don't have an incentive. We're not paying a tenant a cash rebate or an incentive to lure them to our property because there's enough tenants out there, right? So generally speaking, the landlord has an advantage because there's more supply than there is demand. In a commercial setting, it works a little bit differently to that. And that's because more often businesses have to spend quite a bit of money to put themselves into a new property. So what's not uncommon is for the landlord to offer an incentive. An incentive really comes in 2 forms. So the first is a rent-free period. And the rent-free period might be enough to allow them time to get in there for their contractor to do their fit-out works such that they can get to a point where they can open the doors and operate their business. The other is going to be in the form of a contribution to their fit-out. Now let's say, for instance, an incoming tenant has to spend $250,000 on their fit-out in order to open their business in your particular property, and they're prepared to go into a 10-year lease. What you would be doing as the landlord is you'd be working out, okay, well, what is the total rent that I'm going to receive over a 10-year period? And let's just say, for sake of numbers, it's going to be $2 million. Right, so the tenant is going to pay me $2 million over 10 years, and there's going to be escalations on the rent every year. So there might be, say, 3% fixed increases. But when I add all of that up, the starting rent, as it's accumulating year on year, is going to be a total of $2 million. Now, for me, what I'm prepared to give away as a contribution in order to get this tenant, because I know that this tenant's going to add a lot more value to my property, I'm prepared to give away 10% as a contribution. Now, I might give away a part of that in rent-free and a part of that in a contribution towards a fit out. So let's say, for instance, the 10% of the $2 million is $200,000. So I'm prepared to give $150,000 as a cash contribution to their fit out, and the other $50,000 gets taken up in a rent-free period. So that might work out that, hey, the first 4 or 5 months of the initial lease is actually rent-free, so they don't have to pay you anything. Or you might go to the tenant and you might say, okay, well look, we're prepared to contribute an extra $50,000 to a rent-free period, but for the first, say, 10 months, it works out to be 5 months of rent-free, but for the first 10 months you'll pay half rent as you start to establish your business in this area and as you start to bring on more customers, clients or patients. So that's typically how an incentive works, and that's a big difference when it comes to residential and commercial property. So when it comes to number 10 is about the funding profile of commercial property and how that's different to residential property. So if we talk about residential property for a moment, normally what's happening here is that the bank or the lender, the financier, is going to be looking to, yes, the income that's going to come through from the property, but also who is going to be the owner of the property and what does their income look like. So you may have heard some statistics around residential property ownership. 90-something% of real estate investors only own one property, and that's more often than not because they don't have enough serviceability coming through from their job or their business or their side income to be able to support any more properties or any more debt than just one property. When it comes to commercial property, it's a bit different. So the bank or the lender, they're not prepared to gear the property as high as what they might with a residential property. So it's not uncommon to see, 80% gearing or 90% gearing on a residential property. So a lot of it is backed by debt. But in a commercial setting, you're probably talking more sort of 50%, 60% in some cases, maybe even 65%, but it's generally not going to be any higher than that. So what that means is that if you've got $1 million property and a $650,000 or $600,000 mortgage against that property, the bank or the lender is going to be looking at, well, what's the income coming through from the lease? How well does that cover the interest that's going to be payable on that debt? And is there a shortfall? Now, in some cases, there might be a shortfall, and then they would look back to the owner for that difference in interest cover. But because the debt's a lower ratio, more often than not, the lease is going to be able to meet the hurdles that the bank or the lender has with commercial property. So what that means is that if you're looking to build a commercial property portfolio, you're more likely to be able to scale a commercial property portfolio by having multiple properties because you're not hindered and you're not held back by your income and the serviceability that you've got for the debt. So that's why I love commercial properties, because you can keep growing your portfolio in a pretty quick time frame. Okay, so in number 11, the big difference here is how we can quickly increase the value of a commercial property by increasing the net rental. And this is a substantial difference from residential property. If we increase the net rental that's coming through from a residential property, rarely is it going to impact the gross value of that as an asset. But in commercial property, it works very differently. So in point number 3, we use the industrial warehouse as a scenario, right? So we've got an industrial warehouse which is bringing in $100,000 per year in net rental, and the asset was worth $1.666 million. We knew that the cap rate was 6% for this type of asset class in this particular area. So we're going to keep that as the key fundamental. Now, where it gets really interesting is when we can look for more opportunities to increase the net rental that's coming through from the property. So let's say, for instance, it's a large industrial warehouse. It could be 500 square meters that's under roof, but then the property itself, the land, is, let's say, on 1,500 square meters. So there's some vacant land that we can potentially use to generate extra income. So we do our maths and our calculations, and we work out that we can go and build another shed or another warehouse on that property, and we can rent it out for storage. So it's a really passive type of income that's coming through. But let's say, for instance, we can go and spend an extra $100,000 of our capital on putting in a 100 square meter shed. And what that allows us to do is add an extra $25,000 a year in storage fees. Okay, so we're now bringing in $125,000 net income into the property. We know that the cap rate is 6%. So now what we're doing is we're going back to our calculator and we're working out, all right, so I've spent $100,000 to get an extra $25,000 of income. I plug in $125,000 into my calculator and divide that by 0.06%, being the cap rate, which hasn't changed. I've now got a value of $2,083,000. So look at that, guys. We bought it for $1.66 million. We've spent $100,000 on it. We've probably had some closing costs and the like on it, so stamp duty and legals and whatnot. But we've been able to increase the value to $2,083,000 simply by adding a shed. If we look at the difference between that and that, you know, we're talking, let's call it $350,000. We had to spend $100,000, and then we probably had some closing costs on top of that. We're probably like $150,000, $180,000 in front in an equity uplift simply just by using one strategy. And there could be multiple other strategies as well that you could use to push up this income even further. So this is where commercial property can give you a huge advantage and put you on the fast track to developing your commercial property portfolio. Because if you think about that, if you can increase it by 25%, and get, you know, a $350,000 equity uplift, well, you can grow a portfolio really quickly because you're going back to the bank and you're saying, okay, guys, it's been 6 months, I've added a ton of value, I've now got an extra $350,000 in equity that I want to draw out some of that to then go and put a deposit on another property. And that's how you scale and grow your commercial property portfolio really quickly. I hope that that's making sense.
And lastly, the thing that I love about commercial versus residential is the business real property element to it. So with commercial property, if you've got an operating business that you can plug into a commercial property, that's where you can really start to make some good money. Because not only do you own the commercial freehold, but you also own the business that's in the freehold, or you can be buying a commercial property with a business already in place. And in a lot of cases, you know, when people are selling a business, if they've owned it for a long period of time, it's likely that that business has sort of deteriorated over the years because they've lost interest and they've lost the passion behind building the business up. So it presents a great opportunity for hungry, ambitious people to get in there, take ownership of the business, take over the asset as well, and start to really grow the income in the business as well as be able to grow the value of the asset. Because you think about it like this, if you've got a business that's, say, turning over $500,000 a year and it's profiting $50,000 a year, let's say, and then you've got a commercial freehold that sits behind it of, say, $1 million, and the owner's looking to just sell the property and they'll virtually give you the business for free because it's not really worth that much. Well, you might pay, say, $1.1 million to get the commercial freehold. You've also been able to get a business with it. Then what you do is you start to put in some really clever strategies which then help you grow the cash flow of that business and the profitability of that business. And then you go and renegotiate a lease with yourself. So you increase the rate that you're paying on the lease, which then by using the cap rate and the valuation method, that then increases the property value as well. So not only do you have a growing business and a growing business value, but you've now also got a commercial property that's been able to grow quite quickly because you've introduced some new energy into the business and some new strategies, which is just bringing more income to the business and your investing portfolio. So that's it, guys. I hope that that was valuable for you. That really is the 12 key differences that I see in residential and commercial property. So if you did like that, make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next video.